Hi everyone! This is the third of 3 lecture videos for this week. It's a brief presentation on case control studies and odds ratios. A case control study compares cases and controls. A case is someone with the outcome of interest, and a control is someone without that outcome. Case control studies start by recruiting cases. Next, controls are recruited. Exposure histories are assessed for both groups. Then the odds of exposure are calculated. Finally, these odds are compared by calculating an exposure odds ratio. So, what are odds? Odds are a ratio of an event occurring versus not occurring. In a case control study, the event in the ratio is the exposure of interest. In gambling, odds are often the odds of winning versus losing. Because odds are a ratio, the people in the numerator are not included in the denominator. This is different than prevalence and incidence, which are proportions, meaning the number is included in the denominator. Say researchers conducted a study to find out if there's an association between frequent Bluetooth exposure and brain cancer. A case control study starts by recruiting cases, so people with the outcome, with brain cancer, and then recruiting controls, people without the outcome, without brain cancer. Cases might be recruited through a cancer registry or insurance records. The goal is to recruit controls who are as similar as possible to the cases. So, if a 60-year-old white female case is recruited into the study, the researchers probably want to match her with a 60-year-old white female control. Controls might be family members or hospital patients with unrelated diseases, or recruited from a more general population via insurance or other databases. After cases and controls are recruited, researchers ask each group about their history of Bluetooth exposure through interviews or questionnaires. They would probably assess multiple types of Bluetooth exposure, cell phones, earbuds, etc., and they would assess the frequency with which these items were used. Next, researchers would categorize cases and controls according to the total amount of Bluetooth exposure they experienced. Some studies have classified people as having frequent exposure if they've had 1,000 hours of lifetime cell phone use where they're holding the phone to their ears, or about 17 minutes per day over a 10-year period. Now we can add these numbers to the table and use subtraction to find cells C and D. Now we can calculate the exposure odds ratio, which uses division to compare the odds of exposure in cases and controls. If you're wondering why we are only calculating an odds ratio and not an odds difference, it's because there's no such thing as an odds difference. Finally, we can interpret the odds ratio. I've phrased the interpretation in a couple of different ways. In the second, I've turned the odds ratio into a percentage. There are instructions on Canvas about how to do this. The most important thing to remember when you are interpreting the odds ratio is that they compare the frequency of exposure in cases and controls. All other measures of association compare the frequency of outcome in the exposed and unexposed. Here's another example of a case control study that looked for an association between using a certain type of sunscreen and skin cancer. Strengths of case control studies include that they are good for investigating rare outcomes, rare diseases, because we can go out and find people with the rare disease of interest. Case control studies are also relatively quick compared to other study designs, so they're a good initial study to look at new research questions. The main limitation of case control studies is that they can be prone to bias. Sometimes it's hard to find suitable controls, and sometimes when people are asked about their past exposures, it's hard for them to accurately remember. Here's a summary of the major points we covered in this lecture, so you can pause the video and read through them. Well, that's it for case control studies, and that was your last lecture video of the week. Please let me know if you have any questions as you move forward with your homework. Bye, everyone.